The episode opens with, there was a man who had a dream of creating the world's best dessert. He spent years honing his skills to compete in the biggest competition. He led his team to create a beautiful phoenix made of sugar, and everyone already thought he had won the competition. Unfortunately, his life was cut short when his own dessert fell on top of him. In his last breath, he started to regret how his life ended. He wanted to fulfill his dreams, but God was unjust. However, God had other plans for him and decided to reincarnate him in another world. He was born as Milmortal, the son of a noble general. Despite being a noble, his father always did his best to help his people and taught Mil the importance of being kind to others. At the age of 9, Mil was already trained by his father to become a great swordsman. Despite not being the best and wishing to become a pastry, Mil continued to practice and perfect his skills. His father went easy on him, only using one hand, but at the same time he was rigid in his training. He taught him that letting go of the sword on a battlefield was equivalent to death. His eyes were filled with determination, but it wasn't with training, because in Mil's mind, the biggest battle was to pick which dessert he was going to do next. Of course, that led him to lose his sword. It's not the same as using a butter knife. After training, a person came to report that it was almost time for breakfast and the general had some reports to go through. The general wanted to hear the reports right there and then. The person told him there was good news and bad news. The person delivering the news informed him that their bean harvest was going to be huge, just like Mil promised them. Their territory was always barren, which made it impossible for people to cultivate, but Mil used the knowledge from the other world to improve the cultivation and harvesting process of their lands after hearing the news. Mil starts giving more tips on how to improve the cultivation and which dishes he could make, confusing his father, who doesn't even understand how his son understands so much about soil. But Mil couldn't reveal the truth that he was reincarnated. Instead, he simply brushed it off as just having crazy thoughts. However, the mood quickly changed when news arrived that 50 bandits were on the loose and headed toward their town. Cass was anxious, knowing the bandits would destroy the fields and ruin his plans of creating desserts. He didn't want bandits to ruin his dreams. His father wanted to know how much they had to prepare. It was only 1 month. His father wanted to gather the villagers and arm them. But Mil knew this was crazy. They would get at most 30 men in total to defend the land, and if the bandits managed to surround the place, they wouldn't be able to survive in the long term. He heard his father's conversation. They cannot ask for reinforcements because other nearby lords already lost against the bandits, and if they managed to send them and win the battle, they could use it to take the land. The conversation gets even more frustrating to Mil, who's slowly seeing the dream fading away. His father's subordinate notices it. He thinks he's starting to feel the responsibility of becoming the future lord, so he suggests using their trump card Mil. Mil's father didn't understand what he meant, but the guy explained it would be a gamble. The general always trusted his intuition and realized what he meant by the trump card, the sanctification ceremony, a ritual that will awaken Mil's magic powers. Confused Past had no idea what this meant. At the breakfast table, his father made a big announcement to the family. He told them that Past was going to undergo a sanctification ceremony similar to the coming-of-age ceremony in their world. Although it's traditionally meant for 13-15-year-olds, Past's father believed he deemed it fit. He had already good enough swordsmanship skills. But he also was already very intelligent. Mil's mother was initially upset because she wanted him to have more time as a child, but she eventually came around and helped him prepare for the ceremony. His mother ends up accepting the decision, but first she wanted to prepare him. She asked for Mil's sister and the two started to smile at him like creeps. Mil knew he was doomed. He had to face the biggest shame of his life, cross-dressing, and his father simply ignored his call for help, the equivalent of going out to buy milk in this world. Cross-dressing was humiliating for him, but he had to go through with it. They even decided to put makeup on his face. At this point, he just looks like a clown. After 3 days of suffering, it was finally time to go to the royal capital and complete the ritual. His friends were cheering him on and giving him the courage he needed. His father then put his hand on his shoulder and started to chant a spell. The air around them was filled with energy, and in a split second they were teleported to the capital. Mil was fascinated by the sights and all ingredients he could use on his desserts. Despite his curiosity, Mil was reminded by his father that he could only buy anything he wanted if he passed the ceremony. He even discovered a new fruit called bancus which had a sour taste. He wanted to buy them and try to grow in their territory, which impressed his father who fought. Mil wanted to develop the territory and create an army. But as you can guess, this guy only thinks about making his desserts. When they arrived at the church, they met with the panda priests. His father wanted Mil to perform the sanctification ceremony to get his magical abilities. This ceremony involved both physical and mental challenges. First, they measure the magic power by restraining the person and making them drink a bitter drink. They then leave them alone in complete darkness without any senses. Usually kids start screaming after a few minutes, but Mil was different. He spent the whole time thinking about creating new desserts. His mind was filled with ingredients and recipes. His father and panda priest couldn't even believe it. 2 days later, Mil found himself surrounded by golden light particles that get absorbed into his body. His father and the panda priest couldn't even believe in his magic potential. They wake him up and take him to the last part of the ritual. The priest was about to read a scripture, and if Pass had successfully got a magical ability, he would be able to comprehend its meaning. As the panda began to read past, suddenly understood the scripture was magic itself. His father noticed that everything went smoothly, and on their way back home, just as promised, they stopped at the market for Mil to pick out his bonkers. He took his sweet time choosing them and was even given a free one by the kind shopkeeper. 3 weeks had passed and the entire town was now bracing and making preparations for the upcoming bandit siege. The nearby villages have already been attacked and they are preparing to attack Millis' land. He had been assigned to help with the defense preparations and he was eager to lend a hand. He knew that their army was made up of farmers, making them weak and vulnerable. They needed to come up with a strategy, and fast. They created a huge defense wall, filled up the wells, and sealed the small villages. They don't want the bandits to make a base there. The villagers then were going to hide in the biggest village. Defeat was almost certain. They didn't have enough men and their food could only last 3 days. Lost in thought, Mil was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of his childhood friends, Mark and Lumi, who had come to help him. He thinks that on a normal day he would be playing with them, and that thought gives him a plan. He instructed them on how to gather rocks that could be used to throw at the bandits, but also warned them to stay away from the danger as Mark and Lumi were collecting the rocks. They suddenly heard a strange sound. It was the bandits heading straight for their village. They run back and alert about the danger. The general then gave the order for the villagers to fight for their lives to protect their homes. The villagers started to panic. Afraid they couldn't stop them, Millis' father stepped in to give his speech. Every villager grew some balls of courage and decided they won't let them take their land. The general knew the bandits were going to strike at night, so he started to design where his men will be at. The general retainer was worried about the plan, but they asked Mil for his opinion. Imagine trusting a 9-year-old in a battle to death. And guess what? Not only he's a 9-year-old, but he's also a pastry chef. This kid is comparing his recipes to a full battle. Like measuring ingredients when baking can be compared to knowing your enemy's supplies. And guess what? The general agrees with the kid because why not? The general grasped this concept and went off on horseback to scout the area. This allowed them to surprise the bandits and strike first. Meanwhile, Mil was charged with safeguarding the village and the general's absence. He sought out Mark and Lumi to convey the message to signal the attack with fire arrows. Lumi was afraid of potentially harming the general, but Mil remained confident that his father would use them as a guide to come back if he was being chased. He knew his father was intentionally baiting the bandits into a brief and definitive clash with a hidden agenda to gather the children. Although it may seem unacceptable to involve children in a battle, Mil knew that it was necessary to buy them some time. Meanwhile, the general was out scouting and spotted the resources of the bandits. They had 70 men, 5 good horses, and some captives from previous villages. It was a good sign that they did not carry many provisions. With his magic abilities, the general went straight into battle, doing his best to decrease the enemy numbers. In a quick swoop, a few bandits were down. The bandit leader was smart, he gave good instructions and stopped the attack. Without many options, the general decided to retreat instead of attacking again. The bandits saw this as an opportunity and gathered their horses to pursue them, but they made 2 big miscalculations. The first was that they did not notice the trap set by the villagers. The second was that they never expected the supposedly leaderless village to have the mightiest leader of them all. The general spotted the fire arrows and immediately recognized Millis' plan. Mil was guiding his father to come back while also giving their location to the enemy. His father knew their current location and which path to take in order to reduce the damage to the fields. As the bandits drew nearer to the village, Mil gave the order to a bunch of kids to launch a full-on attack with slingshots. The bandits never expected to be hit by a mix of fire rocks right on their faces. They began to flee in panic, but the flames consumed them before they could escape. But the bandits were unable to escape the wrath of the children. Just a few hours earlier, Mil had gathered all the children and explained the plan. He knew that his father would lead the bandits on a chase, so he created a strategy to attack bandits from their flank, which was their weak point. By using the children, they were able to outnumber the bandits and use their slingshots to great effect. His father and the retainers joined this ambush by attacking the bandits, reducing their forces even more. But the bandit leader didn't give up. He managed to parry the rock and climb up the wall. He quickly killed a farmer and challenged the rest. The peasants surrounded him, but he was more experienced in battle. The leader of the bandits ordered everyone to be killed. The full-on fight began, the bandits trying to take on the villagers and the general retainers, while the kids still doing their best to throw rocks. This annoyed the bandit leader. He ran toward the kids and attacked them. The leader went for the kids while the rest fought against villagers and retainers. The kids couldn't move their legs and soon blood was splattered on the floor. Mill managed to push the kid away and got hit in the shoulder. The bandit leader used him as a hostage and Mill used the chance to order the kids to hide. Mill saw a dead man lying on the ground and quickly thought he could use him to his advantage. The man had his head burnt from the rocks and Mill used his magical ability to copy the injury to the other bandits. They too started to feel their heads burning, causing confusion among the bandits and their leader. Mill then used the same spell on the leader who sets him free. The bandit leader cannot understand what's going on and gets hit by a rock just he's about to ask if Mill is a wizard. That brings the episode to an end. The story continues. The confrontation against the bandits finally ended. Pa's mother and sister received the news and they asked about Pas and his father's safety. The father was okay, but Pa's arm was injured. Her mother gets on her knees, worried about her young son, but she gets relieved to know it's only a scratch. Pa's sister is curious on why the two haven't come back yet, but as we know, Pas is worried with other stuff. He's dividing the food supplies between the villagers to ensure their sustenance. Pas then narrates the story about his reincarnation. The son of a poor noble and his only goal in life is to fill this world with sweets. The guards and villagers were taking care of the restrained bandits, planning to send him to another county. Pa's father wants the noble from that county to claim that they dealt with the bandits. They will lose the glory, but they will get something in return from the Lord. His retainer wonders what they will get, but Pa's father reveals they need to negotiate. He at least wants compensation for the battle expenses and losses suffered. Pa's father then starts awarding the training guards and villagers for their bravery with weapons and silver coins. Even Pa's little friends were called up and got rewarded for assisting Pas. The two happily walked home, but Pas came running to help them carry the goods. He compliments their work. They stay humble, claiming that they just threw rocks. Pas is happy that nobody lost their life and that they can return to their usual way. The kids return home and proudly show their mothers how they were rewarded for their help. Mark's mother is happy that he managed to come back safe and she asks Pas. Mark didn't make any trouble. Pas explains they were pretty good and both Mark and Lumi will be the future of their land. Lumi's grandfather also showed his affection, proud that Lumi was helping the lord of the land and his son despite her age. Villagers came in to celebrate the victory. Mark is hyped up that he was about to get his first drink until he got slapped with a cup of milk amidst the celebration. Pas thinks that now that this is over, he can focus on making more sweets. He thinks about making a bonka pie to celebrate and lists the ingredients he needs, but he misses cinnamon. Mark and Lumi step outside because their families usually yell at them, but they're not praising them, but Pas live without a stupid friend. Mark wonders what they did to the bandits. Lumi reveals their restraint in the main village shed, and that's when stupid Mark decides to check them out. Because there's a future Pas retainer, he needs to keep an eye on the bandits. Lumi agrees and follows him. The adults tell them that it's not safe and to go back, but Mark pulls Lumi to the bushes and throws pebbles to distract the adults. They take the chance to get inside the shed just to get scared by the bandits' leader. The leader reveals that Mark now has his sword and asks how he died. Mark is totally scared and falls under the bandits' manipulation. The bandit says that he will die once he gets turned in, so he wants to teach Mark how to use the full power of his magic sword. Mark remembers the past, can use magic and wishes to help him more. The bandit tells Mark to draw the sword and hold it with his hands. Mark follows the instructions and the bandit compliments him, calling him a natural. Lumi tries to call Mark off, but he ignores her. The bandit frees himself from the roofs and tells Mark to get closer to learning the magic words. It's more a magic kick to the gut, sending the stupid kid flying away. The bandit gets up and stabs Lumi, all because a stupid greedy kid. Blood starts to flow from her wound and the guards come back to check the noise. Bandit takes Mark hostage to escape. One of the guards alerts the villagers that Lumi is injured. That's when Pas realizes his friends are a whole new level of stupid and rushes to the place. The bandit tries to threaten the guards, telling he will cut Mark's head off as if he needed to. The guards send more alerts and surround him, but they're still afraid of Mark being injured in the band. Escape on a horse, Lumi is barely managing to survive until Pass arrives. He instructs the guards on how to deal with the injury and asks where the bandit go. He finds out the directions and follows him on his horse. Pass concludes that he can use the anti-bandit traps in the area to his advantage, and if he's in a direct confrontation, he can use his magic to copy the wound back to the bandit. But he manages to realize that he can copy anything he has ever seen. Meanwhile, Pa's father finds about what happened to his old man with the guards for not stopping Pass, making the decision to save his son. Casserole makes his decision to follow him with his retainer Fuel. Fuel is worried that the bandit could have companions awaiting and turn the tables. Fuel then tells Casserole to stay back to assure the villagers. While he uses his magic to find Pass in the forest, Mark is struggling to free himself from the bandit. Suddenly they fall onto a trap, allowing Pass to catch up to them. The bandit is annoyed because of the trap and prepares to fight. Pass remembers his father's teachings about how to use a sword, but he's still a kid, he cannot fight an adult. The bandit is aware that Pass magic can replicate any wound he takes, so he just wants to finish Pass in a single blow. Pass is constantly pushed back until he gets near Mark. The stupid kid tells Pass to abandon him at this point but Pass is different, he will never abandon his friends. The bandit is pretty tired of this and breaks Pa's sword, followed by an attack to cut Pass in half. But this moment Pass uses his magic. Meanwhile Fuel is using his magic to scout the area and find Pa, but the only thing he manages to find Pa's broken sword. He slowly walks back without knowing how to tell Casserole that he lost his son when he gets inside Casserole's house. He finds Pass sitting on his mother's lap. Fuel is shocked and screams. Casserole explains Pass got back with Mark while ago, but he doesn't know the details. Fuel doesn't understand how he missed Pass coming back. He even used his magic to scout the area. Casserole forces Pass to explain what happened. Pass says that it's complicated to make it short. Pass explains he simply copied his father's teleportation magic. Everyone is confused. Pass explains his magic can copy he sees into something. So he copied his father's magic into his body and teleported out with Mark. Casserole understands the situation, but still scolds Pa. He forbids him from revealing that he can use other people's magic or use those spells in public. Using spells in a battle can be dangerous and he could get himself killed very quickly. Pass knew this would happen and that's why he didn't want to reveal after calming down. Casserole explains to Fuel that people could aim for Pass his ability to copy magic, make others target him to turn him into a human weapon. The worst part is that the bandit managed to get away and could reveal that secret. Pass then goes out to meet Mark and reveals that Lumi will survive. Mark is super depressed, but Pass tries to convince him to visit her together. Mark blames himself for not hearing them. If he did, she would never get hurt. Pass tries to comfort him, telling to apologize. He drags Mark to visit her, but she's quite smiley despite the injury. She reveals that she's okay, but she isn't allowed to go out and play. Pass then decides to use the kitchen to give Mark and Lumi some time alone. Actually, Pass only cares about the sweet he's going to make, while Mark is all gloomy, depressed. Stupid boy Pass thinks that he can bring smiles to everyone's face by cooking. So he decides to make his bonka pie. He carefully prepares it to the detail. While Mark properly apologizes to Lumi, but she's freaked out by the apology, the mood becomes quite weird between the two. Mark is apologizing. Lumi doesn't really care until Pass comes back literally 5 minutes later with a bonka pie. The two start drooling. They never saw bonka pie in their lives. Pass explains this is his way to make Lumi feel better and also cheer Mark up. The two start eating it like savages and Lumi mentions that it makes her feel like she isn't wounded anymore. But Pass has another surprise. Sliced bonkers and honey, the two kids hate it because the flavor is the opposite of the pie. Pass then pulls out his inner Socrates. He explains that every bonka tastes different and he needs to find harmony and flavors. Pass compares it to people, explaining that Mark has unique traits and that he will find a way to make those traits shine. The lesson he really wants to give is that failing at something only means that he can learn, work hard, and improve. Mark finally cheers up until Lumi's father steps into the room. This guy literally looks like the demon lord, demanding Mark to feel responsible for injuring Lumi. Turns out that he only wants to set up a marriage between the two. Mark ends up flustered and doesn't know how to react. When Lumi is asked about her view, she's like, sure, why not? Mark is still trying to recover, and Lumi gives some bonka pie to her father. Mark notices there's only one last slice remaining and asks about his share. Lumi playfully replies that the husband's assets belong to the wife, so she will take it. Pass then realizes that his theory was true. Sweet Spring smiles to faces, but he's only just started. That brings the episode to an end. Previously, Mill was competing for the title of the best pastry of the world, but he died in an accident. God then decided to reincarnate him in another world as Pastry Mill, the son of a noble with an S-rank magic. Things continue. A month passed after the bandit incident, but there was another problem. Pass met Fuel and Casserole, who told them they're broke like me. Fuel initially ignored it because Casserole always claims to be broke. Pass, on the other hand, wants to fix the situation. Casserole explains they had to shut down two villages because of the bandits, and now they need to dig out the wells and rebuild the houses again. But they also need to have provisions for all the villagers. Plus the fields need to be repaired, and there's no money for all of this. They were going to get 200 gold pieces for the bandit leader. But Mark's stupidity ruined their chances of getting a reward. Casserole thinks about borrowing money from another noble. However, they won't lend anything. All near my lands were damaged in the winter, and the bandits also damaged it. Casserole thinks about asking the court nobles in the capital for money, but their interest rates will extort them. Pass questions if they can ask his grandparents for help, but his parents cut ties with their families 15 years ago. Casserole says they didn't even introduce Pass to his grandparents, so it's impossible to ask them for money. He further explains that everyone was against him marrying Pa's mother because their lands were really poor, so they basically decided to run away. Casserole then decides to call it for a day because overthinking won't lead to an answer. Pass returns to his friends who quickly understand the situation. Mark tells him to not hide stuff from them because they could also help. Pass changes the topic and asks about Lumi's recovery. She reveals that she can already go out, but she still feels some pain. Mark questions the possibility of making their fields bigger to cultivate more, but they don't have the time, people, or even the money to do it. Lumi says that Pass could sell his sweets in the city, but he cannot afford the production costs. Mark suggests the Pass could teach magic. Pass asks why he wants to learn magic. Stupid Mark thinks that he will become rich just because he can use magic. Of course, his future wife starts shaming him because he's too stupid to learn it. And even if he does, he will probably set himself on fire. Pass tries to mediate their argument, calling it flirting, and Lumi says that magic could be the key. She tells Pass they could get an idea if he shows them his magic. Pass remembers that in his previous life he would talk to his colleagues and get ideas for new sweets, so he decides to give it a try. Pass tells them to draw something on the ground. Mark draws himself, defeating a dragon with magic, while Lumi draws some bonkers. Pass then uses his magic to copy the images into their hands. Lumi tries to rub it off, but it doesn't disappear. Pass explains it's permanent if he uses it on trees or walls, but it disappears in 3 days if he uses it on skin. Lumi then asks if he can do the opposite. Pass is confused. She says that he can copy a drawing into something and asks if he copies something else as a drawing. He still doesn't understand. She explains that it would be cool if he could put a picture of a house or someone's face on the ground. Mark tells her that doesn't make sense, but Pass realizes this is the answer he was looking for. He holds her hand and calls her a genius. He then realizes that Lumi is blushing and gets shy. He apologizes and immediately storms off to meet his father. Casserole was discussing the situation with Fuel and his wife. They were considering asking for money from her parents, but she isn't sure about it. Suddenly, Pass storms into the room with a plan. They all want to hear it. He asks if his father remembers the time when he mentioned his attempts to arrange a marriage for Josephine, Pass' sister, who is already 13 and within the typical marriage age. His father still doesn't understand where Pass going. Pass explains that his father can take Josephine around to introduce her to other nobles because he can use his teleportation magic. But some nobles cannot use magic and are forced to attend a royal ball in the capital. But that's an expensive and dangerous trip. Pass says they could sell matchmaking photos. He then uses his magic to make his mother's portrait on a plank of wood. Casserole and Fuel cannot believe it because it's so detailed. His mother looks at it and she feels like she's seeing herself in a mirror. Pass' goal is to use this magic to make a picture of nobles who are looking for a marriage partner. Casserole thinks this is a perfect opportunity. They can charge 5 or 10 gold pieces per picture, but it could become even more expensive. Some parents won't care about money if they're able to introduce their kids like this. Fuel mentions there's a risk to expose Pass magic if they do this. Pass explains they won't be able to hide it forever, and if they do this, people will think his magic is just about making pictures. Casserole decides to test this idea first with counter tests because he will meet her to talk about the bandits. Casserole and Pass arrive in the city of Rootsvale and ask for a meeting with Count Lethesh. Count Lethesh is watching from the window, curious if he wants to blame her for not dealing with the bandits. She plans to simply praise Casserole for his achievements and send him off. Pass and his father get inside, where they meet Count Brioche Lethesh. Pass remembers his father giving him a brief introduction to her. She is the eldest daughter of the previous count, but her father passed away in battle and Brioche assumed authority of the county until the rightful heir is old enough. However, the heir mysteriously died before becoming an adult. Casserole shows his respects to Brioche, and she mentions how Pass looks like a charming young man. Pass approaches her to show his respects, but he already noticed that she's observing their behavior. She invites them to join her for tea, but Pass is more focused on the cookies. She mentions that this is her land specialty and that she prepared the best possible tea. Casserole stays polite and praises how famous her tea is, mentioning that the aroma and flavor live up to its reputation. But Pass is still focused on the cookies. He grabs one and tries it, just to find it tastes horrible. Brioche doesn't understand because most kids love to receive any kind of sweet. Pass then sips on the tea, just another disappointment. Brioche praises Casserole for not only being excellent in military matters, but also for all the agricultural changes he made on his land. She mentions that she would love to learn his secrets and knowledge. That's when Casserole drops the bone. Most of the changes made to his land, it's because of Pass' advice. She thinks he's refusing to be acknowledged for his achievements. Of course, nobody would ever believe that a kid who isn't still 10 years old would be capable of overseeing the cultivation of a wasteland. Brioche tells Pass that he must be proud of having such an amazing father. Casserole and Pass have been waiting for this moment. Since she's talking to Pass, he can unleash his true beast. First he says that he's proud of his father, but he then counterattacks that his father's land was raided by several hundred bandits. It was so bad that Pass and other kids were forced to join the fight. Brioche wasn't expecting this blow from a 9-year-old kid. Almost everyone knows it was 50 bandits, but he's just telling a lie to get an advantage. He wants to throw her off while negotiating. Brioche realizes that she made a mistake by allowing a kid to talk about this subject. She's forced to stay calm and mentions that it's great to see a young boy assuming the responsibility of nobility. But Pass attacks again. He mentions that they interrogated the bandits who revealed they had come out of retest fail. She realizes the Pass is trying to negotiate damages and pretends to be ignorant, but Pass is already prepared. He mentions that they are prepared to turn a few bandits over to her so she can interrogate them as well, but he doesn't stop. He mentions that according to the law they could hand the bandits to the royal family, and if they do that it will lead to an official investigation. She tries to counter by mentioning that they defeated a huge group of bandits. Maybe the survivors escape into Casserole's land. But Pass remembers Fuel's initial report regarding the bandits. He remembers the bandits stating they had dealt severe damage to retest Vale before moving to their lands, but Brioche claims they defeated them. So Pass asks who did fight against the bandits. Brioche cannot accept defeat and makes the mistake of asking Pass if they have any proof. Casserole then shows a sword owned by one of the bandits, and that sword was carrying Lethesh family crest. Brioche quickly realizes that she was caught in her lie. Pass attacks, again mentioning her test men failed to eradicate the bandits and because of it Casserole's lands were raided. Pass explains they don't want to cause trouble over this incident, but since they were attacked, they need to be compensated for Lethesh failure. She asks if he considers 100 gold pieces appropriate, but Pass replies that it doesn't cover the damages. She reveals that he doesn't seem like a child, and UPS the compensation to 130, but Pass refuses. She cannot believe she was beaten by a kid and decides to give 150 gold pieces. Pass asks his father's opinion and they accept the deal while they sign the contract. Brioche realizes that Pass is exceptional and realizes that he might be the reason his father's land is prospering, especially because fathers are the ones who conduct negotiations, but Pass just put her to shame. She still thinks that 150 gold pieces is a small price to pay, considering she could have lost the king's trust. After everything is done, Brioche reveals she underestimated Pass due to his age. Pass apologizes for the things he said, but he needed to do it. She says he never introduced himself to her and she follows up on her request. She mentions that she noticed his reaction to the tea and cookies and asks if there was something wrong. Pass unleashes his true demon form. He mentions that the cookies and cake were overly sweet. His father realizes that letting him speak was a mistake, but Pass doesn't stop. Pass continues by saying that it will be more appealing if they add something less sweet to go with the tea. Pass tries to continue his explanation of how to do it, but Casserole bonks his head before leaving. Pass apologizes for not bringing a gift. so he pulls out a piece of cloth and uses his magic. Brioche barely believes that she saw him make a portrait of her in a second. She thanks him for the gift and Pass says goodbye. That brings the episode to an end. Things continue. Casserole then went to a coming-of-age ceremony of the Duke's quadrisect grandson. He congratulates the Duke for his grandson Squale's recent coming-of-age. The Duke then introduces Squale, mentioning he graduated as the top student in the military academy. The young boy nervously salutes Casserole and the Duke apologizes for his stiffness. He reveals that Squale admires Casserole and was looking forward to meeting his childhood hero. Casserole mentions it's an honor and introduces Pass to the Duke. Pass introduces himself in a relaxed and confident manner, impressing the Duke. He calmly compliments Squale, who bites his tongue due to his nerves. The Duke mentions that despite being younger, Pass looks more mature than his grandson. He also mentions that Pass is already an adult and asks if he awakened his magic. Pass mentions he indeed got magic abilities by the grace of God, impressing the Duke, who mentions Casserole's family has been blessed. Pass stays calm and humbly replies that he got lucky. The Duke gets curious and asks if Pass can demonstrate his magic. Pass accepts and asks if he can borrow a piece of cloth from the butler. He casts his magic, printing the image of a beautiful young girl. The Duke is impressed, but his grandson's heart skips a beat. Pass mentions this is a gift from himself and Margrave of Huberec, who wanted to introduce his daughter to Squale. The Duke mentions the Margrave couldn't be present and asks if it's truly his daughter. Pass introduces her as Margrave's third daughter named Petra. He explains that he visited their domain with his father's magic and met her. The Margrave is currently stuck in a conflict and Petra couldn't come to meet Squale, so they decided to introduce her this way. Squale is head over heels for her, mentioning she's cute and pretty. Pass takes this chance to invite him to come to her coming-of-age celebration in the next month. Squale instantly agrees. His grandfather gets mad because Squale is stupid. He's not thinking of the position of family and doesn't recognize this was a marriage proposal. The Duke tries to play safe and tells Squale to calm down. He then asks how he plans on getting there. Pass mentions they can use his father's magic to travel safely. Squale acts like a happy puppy, telling his grandfather that they would have problems with Casserole's help. The Duke starts regretting, but Pass sees a chance. He whispers the Margrave has been fighting for some years and is getting tired. The Duke gets interested and asks for more information. Pass mentions the Margrave wants to stop the battle by using the Duke's military, and for that he wants to marry his daughter to Squale. Despite only it being Pass's opinion, the Duke thinks it's a piece of interesting and reliable information. The Duke decides to come along to Petra's celebration while thinking that it may become a good story to tell the king. Squale later comes to Pass and they become friends. He takes this chance to ask what kind of things Petra likes. Pass only met her once and mentions she liked the sweets he baked. Squale asked if Pass was skilled at making sweets, and Pass replies that he finds happiness in making them. Pass starts going overboard, explaining the sweets he likes the most. But Squale interrupts him to ask him a favor. Pass thinks he wants him to make some sweets, but turns out Squale wants another portrait of Petra, spicier one. Pass ends up agreeing because his goal is to become the matchmaker between the two. A few weeks passed and winter is getting close. The villagers focus their time on rebuilding their homes and getting provisions of food and firewood. Casserole is satisfied with the current situation, yet Fuel strikes him with a question. He asks why Casserole gives money to his people or helps them in their work, something unusual for Lawrence. Casserole explains doing it doesn't make him look good, but his reputation would be worse if his people fell into poverty. Fuel says Casserole is kind and Pass enters the office, mentioning he heard them talk about sweetness. Fuel tells Pass to at least knock next time because of his manners. Pass explains he heard them inside, so there shouldn't be a problem. He then turns to his father and gives him the letter they received. Casserole reads the letters from the Duke and Margrave and mentions that their temporary income problem has been resolved. They will be receiving 20,000 pieces of silver because Squale and Petra's engagement has been decided. They will be announcing it during Petra's coming of age. Pass is happy that it worked because he spent several hours getting the matchmaking photo. The Margrave took 2 whole days to decide on the one that satisfied his requirements. The Margrave will also send 30 gold coins in advance, which Fuel thinks they could use to get some horses. Casserole explains the funds are meant to be used to protect Petra. Pass is initially confused, but his father explains the Margrave requested them to keep her safe during their trip and during the ceremony in the capital. Fuel mentions there are plenty of people who are against the idea of marriage between the two noble families. Casserole thinks the same, mentioning the enemy of the Margrave. Fuel thinks it's okay because they're keeping the engagement a secret, but Pass understands the church might leak the information. Casserole explains the church is officially a neutral entity, but if paid enough money they will reveal information. Pass also realizes that they can collect tons of information because they claim to be neutral. Casserole mentions he can protect Petra by himself with his teleportation spell, but it will be hard to teleport her and the guards protecting her to the capital at the same time. Fuel mentions they can recruit mercenaries in the capital, but the enemy could infiltrate. Casserole mentions they will be at a disadvantage of Balvaldia because they don't know the terrain. Fuel mentions they should refuse to escort Petra, but Casserole refuses. He mentions this is the best opportunity to get the trust of both lords, which will create a domino effect for Mortal's future development. Pass then suddenly gets the perfect idea to protect Lady Petra. He mentions the perfect places where there aren't any windows, there's a single door and you can't leave without an excuse. The church, he explains. It's an unknown place where only those who go under the sanctification with Petra there. They can prolong the ceremony due to various circumstances. Casserole thinks it's a good idea because most people won't interfere with the church. Fuel says this is a perfect plan to earn the gold and build more houses. Pass also delivers an invoice from the traveling merchant with the supplies delivered and tries to leave, but Casserole tells him to stop because there is an unwanted creative bonkers in the case of Sugar. Pass tries to play it out, mentioning it's the best opportunity to get things they usually can't get. He wants to use this chance to get ingredients for the future. Casserole knows he only thinks about sweets and deducts the cost from Pass's allowance. The day of Petra's coming of age quickly arrived and Casserole met the Margrave to escort them. The Lord was impressed that Pass was also going to join them. Casserole mentions that Petra will feel more comfortable with someone around her age, yet in reality Pass is part of their plan. They step inside the carriage and greet Petra and her younger twin sister Licorice. Petra thanked Pass for the baked goods he gave when they met and promises to make more. He tries to talk to Licorice, but since she isn't good at communication, replies in a cold manner. Licorice tries to apologize to Petra, who tries to mediate the situation, but she thinks she's only a bonus. Pass's escorting plan is to head to a local church where they will pretend Petra is going under the sanctification ceremony. They will then teleport to the capital and then protect Petra until the appointed time. The Margrave tells Casserole there are people on the move to hurt Petra, but Casserole assures that everything is arranged. They finally arrive at the church, where Pass expects to be attacked because they will be exposed. The group decides to ambush them, but everyone steps up to protect the girls. Casserole easily defeats his opponent, but one manages to sneak into the carriage. The two sisters begin to scream, scared for their lives. But Pass steps up to protect the girls with this sword. He takes the fight outside, promising to protect the girls. The girls cannot believe their eyes as they see Pass blocking the opponent's attack. Suddenly one more tries to attack him from the side and Licorice tries to warn him. When Pass is about to get hit, Casserole manages to disarm the bandit father and son, then manage to defeat the bandits, and Casserole tells them to return and fight him after training 200 years. The bandits retreat and Pass takes the chance to correct him because people cannot live that long. The Margrave thank them for protecting his daughters, but Casserole tells them to go inside. The girls are still scared, but Pass tries to calm them down. They step inside the church and head to the basement, which Petra notices that it's a bit far. Licorice seems to be afraid of the dark and calls for her sister, but Pass gently holds her hand. He tells her she's safe because they're there, making the little girl blush. That brings the episode to an end. Things continue after comforting Licorice. Pass guides her down. This makes her think about Pass, who's younger than her but behaves like an adult. She wanted to catch her sister's hand, but she thinks that Pass is the only one who doesn't compare her with her sister. She has always been indecisive, and she thinks that her sister was chosen as the bride because she's prettier. She doesn't think highly of herself, because she feels like she's just an extra. She remembers that she acted unpleasantly to him when they met, but he still helped her. After reaching the end of the stairs, Petra asks if they're going to do the sanctification ceremony there, but gets startled when Pass replies no. He explains his father will use his magic to teleport them to the capital, where they will proceed with the ceremony. Petra and Licorice feel relieved. Pass guides them inside the room and tells everyone to hold their hands in a single line. They follow his instructions and Casserole uses his magic, teleporting them to the church in Bold Valdia. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, there's this weird guy living in this broken house. He explains to a group of mercenaries that he called them here to do a job for him, so he can rebuild the Omnia house. He tells the men that he plans to deal a blow to the Cattlesec family. The mercenaries will do anything for money, so they ask whom they need to kill. The weirdo explains they don't need to kill anyone because their task is to bring a certain woman to him. If they succeed, they will receive 10 pieces of gold. The leader of the group asks if the girl is an aristocrat. The weirdo tells them he wants Petra and they shouldn't mess it up. Once the group leaves, they talk about how the weirdo is too arrogant. They're curious because this idiot created this whole plan just to become an aristocrat. The group cannot understand the weirdo's intentions and think they will be blamed for taking Petra. The leader explains the weirdo's plan has 2 goals. The first is to destroy the Cattlesec family reputation, and the second is to claim that he saved her and will become an aristocrat by marrying the girl. This only works because Petra's parents will want to keep their status by protecting her innocence. Back at the church, Pass looks out the window and states that the security is a bit heavy. Casserole explains those are the Margrave's underlings. He finds it impressive, yet Pass hits a wound when he mentions their family cannot gather that many people. Petra reveals she's a bit worried because she doesn't feel like she's engaged. Pass explains that once she meets Squale, she will finally realize it, and he even tries to wingman him by saying good things. This is a true brow. Petra goes lovey-dovey mentioning how Squale's portrait made him look kind and lovely. Pass thinks the engagement photo was super effective. The Margrave comes and tells Petra that the panda priest is waiting for her to start the ceremony. Fuel rushes in, and Casserole asks how the situation is in the Cattlesec house. Fuel explains there's a large crowd around and even some nobles from far territories are coming. Casserole explains this marriage will combine the Margrave and the Duke's family, which will result in the strongest noble house. Pass asks if the nobles are coming because they want to get their favor. Casserole then gives Pass an important mission. His job is to accompany Licorice to the reception room until Petra is finished. His father explains Licorice seems a bit tired. Pass didn't notice it, and Fuel whispers that Pass needs to be empathetic and escort her. Pass then approaches Licorice, mentioning that it's hard to rest in that place. He then says they've prepared a separate room for her to rest. She's hesitant, but he tells her that it's important to rest while giving his hand. She shyly holds onto it, and he guides her. Fuel takes the chance to call Pass a womanizer and comments to not make a woman cry. Casserole tells Fuel to not teach that stuff to Pass. Meanwhile, the other weirdo is drinking his celebratory wine, mentioning he will make Cattlesec pay. At the same time, the carriage and guard that will escort Petra arrive at the church and she leaves with her father after finishing the ceremony. Casserole and Fuel watch them depart and mention that only Licorice is now missing. Casserole explains their mission will end once they escort the Margrave and his daughters back home. He's happy that everyone is doing well until now, but he's still suspicious about the huge crowd. They've dealt with a decent number of suspicious people, but they cannot let their guard down because there is still the possibility that some threats haven't been discovered. Fuel then mentions that he's worried about Pass. Turns out his worries about Pass is hanging out with an unmarried girl in the same room. Casserole mentions Licorice's sanctification ceremony will soon begin, so he doesn't need to worry. Plus, she has a very scary maid escorting her inside. Pass is a bit confused because Licorice is made safe instead of going with Petra. Throughout, the maid is a bit aggressive while explaining she's here to protect Licorice. Pass initially startled and asks if she can relax. Suddenly Pass seems to sense something. Licorice asks what's going on and he mentions that he heard something. The ground starts shaking, which creates a huge hole in the floor. Licorice and Pass fall into the hole and maid shouts for help. Casserole rushes inside the room to find out what's going on. He examines first the situation and realizes this massive bottomless pit was created by a mage. He orders Fuel to explain the situation to the Margrave and then jumps into the pit. Meanwhile, Pass awakens and tries to understand what happened. He discovers that he and Licorice got tied up and notices the mercenary leader from inside. The leader asks if he needs to explain the situation, but Pass replies that he knows what happened. The leader says that he will let Pass go if he behaves properly, but Pass is focused on finding out the reason they got taken away and how much time he will have to wait for his father to find him. He wonders why he is being hostage because his family is poor. He then looks at Licorice and realizes they are after her. The mercenary leader tells one of his men to keep an eye on them before leaving. He tells Pass that he will kill him if he tries to do something. Without any second thought, he decides that he must protect Licorice. Casserole finally reaches the end of that massive endless pit and realizes the culprits already escaped. Licorice finally wakes up and Pass asks if she understands what's going on since she doesn't. Pass explains all he knows and tells her to relax. She was initially worried, but she decides to believe Pass. The guy guarding them says that Pass is trying to show off. Pass understands the earlier guy is their mage, but is still careful about the remaining ones and decides to get more information. He starts questioning the new guy, mentioning he wants to know what will happen to them. The guard explains that Pass might get killed since they only need the girl. Pass tries to find where they are, but the guard refuses to answer. He then tries to pull the kid's move and starts to cry while trying to find out the reason. The guy gets annoyed and threatens him, but Pass mentions that he's the eldest son of an aristocrat and his father could pay 200 gold pieces for his ransom. He even says that his father would pay even more if the person behind this is a noble. The bandit thinks that he could get the ransom for himself and run away. Pass looks around and understands that this place belonged to a duke family that fell 10 years ago. He remembers reading the list of possible threats for Petra's escort and realizes there was only one duke on that list. It was the Duke of Almania. He uses his magic to copy the information into a ribbon belt, and then copies his father's magic to teleport it to his father. Meanwhile, Casserole returned to the church to see if he can get more information. Fuel also returned and explains that the Margrave decided that Petra's engagement should be treated as a priority and cannot move his man. Casserole understands the situation, but he knows that it was a hard decision to make. He then mentions that they could do something if they knew who attacked the maid, tries to recover from her shock, and berates Casserole for being cold when his son and Licorice were taken away. Yet he explains that he's confident because Pass is with her. At that moment, there's a light in the room and the ribbon appears. Casserole holds it and reads the information, revealing that Pass and Licorice are being held in Romania's estate. They realize that someone from the former Duke family is the culprit. He orders Fuel to get some of the Duke's men while he gathers volunteers from outside the church. Meanwhile, the mercenary leader gets inside the room angry because he just realized that they got Licorice instead of Petra. He tries to attack her, but Pass uses his magic to teleport next to her. Yet he gets punched by the mercenary leader. The other guy is confused because he didn't understand how Pass moves so quickly, but he asks the leader what's going on. The leader explains they won't get paid because they got the wrong girl and the engagement announcement is happening right now. Pass then realizes their true intentions, but he doesn't have time to think. The bandits want to kill them to avoid leading any witnesses. The leader focuses on Licorice, but Pass unties himself and uses one of the standby swords to protect her. He knocks the other guy down and tries to confront the leader, who's confused hell. Licorice is relieved and Pass mentions he will be with her. Pass steps forward asking the mercenary leader to surrender, but the bandit refuses to, mentioning the battle has just begun, but Pass states this is a checkmate. That brings the episode to an end.